It is so good to be here with you. We left about a year and a half ago and started a mentoring, coaching, and training ministry for leaders in ministry called Alongside You, and that's what we have been doing. And it's I did not expect the volume and amount of need that is out there. I knew there was need. But I did not realize that within a year we would be turning people away because we just can't meet everybody's need. And it's been an amazing ride. We travel a lot. We do a lot of coaching and caring for leaders in ministry, pastors, church planners, spouses, elders, sessions, churches. We like to do preventative maintenance, right? Work on the 5 resilient factors, pointing people to Jesus, just like we talked about here. Pastors and leaders need that too. It's like getting your regular oil change of your car. It's rotate your tires. It's a good thing to do, all right? Because if you don't do it, eventually what might happen? The head gasket's going to blow, right? And then it's a real problem. Well, we also get called into some crisis intervention and situations, and that's not easy, all right? You know, some of you have been through church difficulty, church trauma and drama. And we've gotten called into some crazy situations. So as you're praying for Steve and Tammy, and alongside you, just pray that we have wisdom, compassion, and humility as we help a lot of people all over the U.S. Today is March 19. It was on March 23rd, 1997, that we had our first worship service. So literally 26 years ago this week, all right? It was a Palm Sunday, and so we historically have celebrated our anniversary on Palm Sunday because that's a moving target every year, and it changes. But as I was thinking back, I was like, wait, this is the week. It was early in March, or almost the end of March. So Gahanna Middle School South is where we had our first worship services. Who was here for that? Oh, yep, the Garys were here. So them old folks in the back there. We were here a couple weeks ago, and Todd Williams like, Steve, when are you coming back? We need somebody to tell the old stories. Like, who's going to tell the Uncle Oliver story? And what about some of the other stories that happened here at Walnut Creek? And so, Todd, thank you very much. I'm here, and you prompted me to remember God's faithfulness to Walnut Creek over the past 26 years. Now, our nation's capital, Washington, D.C., which I fly in and out of a lot because if you got to go to Raleigh or there's some places that we go to that for some reason we have to do a layover and switch planes in D.C. And many times I fly into D.C. at night for a layover to get over to Columbus, and it's amazing even as you're flying in and you're going right over, almost over the Capitol, and you can even at night see all of the monuments that are up. It's a beautiful city during the day, even when it's all lit up, because it's got magnificent architecture. But what sets D.C. apart from other U.S. cities are all the many monuments and the memorials. Right? The Washington and the Jefferson and the Lincoln, the Iwo Jima and the Vietnam Memorial. I mean, they're just amazing memorials and monuments because they are set up and erected so that we don't forget the past. Even New York City has an absolutely beautiful monument with the Statue of Liberty to remember the freedom that our country has offered so many. My great-grandparents seeing the Statue of Liberty, one of the first sights they saw when they immigrated from Hungary, Budapest, Hungary, to America. Do you know what the tallest monument is in America? It's the St. Louis Arch, right? Honoring the trailblazing and frontier spirit of the Western movement, right? The gateway to the West. That monument's 630 feet tall. It's huge. Monuments are there so that people ask, what's it there for? It's commemorating something. What is it commemorating? And so these monuments are erected and set up to help us remember significant people or significant events in the past. And they're memorials to help us not forget the greatness of a person or a movement or a momentous occasion. Israel itself had its monuments. And we find them first erected in Joshua chapter 4. In the Older Testament, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Joshua. And you can get right there to Joshua chapter 4. It'll be on behind me. I'm going to read the entire chapter, 24 verses. Please put your seats and trays in their upright and locked positions. I'm going to read fast, okay? When all the nation had finished passing over the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, "Take 12 men from the people, from each tribe a man, and command them, saying, Take 12 stones from here out of the midst of the Jordan River, from the very place where the priest's feet stood firmly, and bring them over with you and lay them down in the place where you lodge tonight." Then Joshua called the 12 men from the people of Israel, whom he had appointed, a man from each tribe. And Joshua said to them, "Pass on before the ark of the Lord your God on the midst of the Jordan. Take up each of you a stone upon his shoulder, according to the number of the tribes of the people of Israel, that it may be a sign among you. And when your children ask in time to come, 'What do these stones mean to you?' then you shall tell them that the waters of the Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it passed over the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. So these stones shall be to the people of Israel a memorial forever." And all the people of Israel did just as Joshua commanded, and took up 12 stones out of the midst of the Jordan, according to the number of the tribes of the people of Israel, just as the Lord told Joshua. And they carried them over with them to the place where they lodged, and laid them down there. And Joshua set up 12 stones in the midst of the Jordan, in the place where the feet of the priests bearing the ark of the covenant stood, and there they are to this day. For the priests bearing the ark stood in the midst of the Jordan until everything was finished that the Lord commanded Joshua to tell the people. According to all that Moses had commanded Joshua, the people passed over in haste. And when all the people had finished passing over, the ark of the Lord and the priests passed over before the people. And when the priests bearing the ark of the covenant of the Lord came up from the midst of the Jordan, the soles of the priests were lifted up on dry ground. The waters of the Jordan returned to their place and overflowed its banks as before. You have to understand, the second land crossing in the middle of an ocean or a waterway that God has done for the people of Israel. You remember the Red Sea with Moses, right? It happens again as they're leaving Egypt, getting ready to move into the promised land, which was promised. God caused the parting of the Red Sea. Now, as they're finally, 40 years later, entering into the promised land, God does it again. That's what's going on here. And the people came up out of the Jordan on the 10th day of the first month, and they encamped at Gilgal on the east border of Jericho. And those 12 stones which they took out of the Jordan, Joshua set up at Gilgal. And he said to the people of Israel, "When your children ask their fathers in times to come, 'What do these stones mean?' then you shall let your children know, Israel passed over this Jordan on dry ground. For the Lord your God dried up the waters of the Jordan for you until you passed over, as the Lord your God did to the Red Sea, which he dried up for us until we passed over, so that all the peoples of the earth may know that the hand of the Lord is mighty, and that you may fear the Lord your God forever." God wanted his people to remember, and he wanted the world to know that the hand of the Lord is mighty. His arm is not too short to save, that he is strong and comes and works on behalf of his people whom he is utterly committed to. And so through the miraculous events of the passing on the dry ground through the flooded Jordan River and the Red Sea, God wanted not just the Israelites, but all of civilization to know for all of antiquity, to never forget that the Lord God, the creator and maker of the heavens and the earth, had rescued his people and freed them from slavery, and that he had prepared them a way into the promised land. Now, life wasn't going to be easy moving into the promised land. I mean, the great exodus and migration of an entire nation is a daunting undertaking. But God wanted his people, his beloved people, to have confidence as they moved forward. That when things got tough, they could look back at God's miraculous works on their behalf and take courage to keep moving forward. The very first verses of Joshua, in Joshua chapter 1, God is telling Moses, as Moses' leadership was in its twilight, and he's going to pass the mantle of leadership on to Joshua. God told Moses this, and to tell Joshua was to tell the people, right? Joshua 1, 8, and 9. Do not be afraid. Be courageous, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. Now, these weren't just words. God wanted to demonstrate this fact, and as he did, as they came out of Egypt, he wanted to demonstrate it again as they're moving into Jordan. That they could be strong and courageous and not afraid. Why? Because the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. It's no different for us, friends. Our confidence in God's present and future reliability is grounded in his past faithfulness to us. It's grounded in history. Or think of it this way. His story. So 3 things. And how much time do I have? Because I'm starting at a different time. And somebody give me, when's my drop dead time? Not that I want to drop dead. I just want to quit the sermon. 10 till? All right, good. Keep those trays up. Number 3 things. God's memorial stones remind us of God's faithfulness. Memorial stones teach our children of God's faithfulness. And 3rd, memorial stones testify to the world God's faithfulness. First of all, they remind us of God's faithfulness. God's works of wonder ought to be kept in everlasting remembrance because, as my wife is fond of saying, we are leaky. Our minds are like colanders or sieves. The truth keeps keeping to leak out. And you do things and say things like, I know better. I know this is the truth. Why did I do that? And we have our palm slapping moments because we're like, how did I forget? Because we do forget easily. We are a forgetful people. And especially as we're getting older, talk to me. I need more reminders. And I need reminders of why we choose to depend on God. I don't know about you, but the old saying, out of sight, out of mind, is very true for me. That's why I have to keep a to-do list in front of me every day to keep me on task, because sometimes if it's out of sight, it's out of mind. And I just get involved in some other things, and there's other good things I do, but I got to get some important things to do. So I keep that to-do list in front of me, because if it's out of sight, it's out of my mind. Getting caught up in the everyday, mundane patterns of living, sometimes we forget that God is there with us. I mean, how many times, guys, do you think as you're shaving for the 88th day in a row, God is with me as I'm shaving? Ladies, as you're shaving, oh, God is with me. You know, you're doing life as you're doing the dishes for the 8th time that day. Oh, God is with me in this everyday thing. As you're doing your times tables, kids, and you're working through them because you got to get your math done. You're like, oh yeah, 3 3s is 9, 3 4s is 12. It's just every day. God is with me. We don't think of him in the mundane things of life. And it's not just us. Listen to Judges and then Nehemiah. No sooner had Gideon died than the Israelites again prostituted themselves to the Baals. And they set up Baal-berith as their god and did not remember the Lord their God, who had rescued them from the hands of their enemies at every side. Nehemiah chapter 9. But they, our forefathers, became arrogant and stiff-necked and did not obey your commandments. They refused to listen and failed to remember. These are the people of God who even had these memorial stones erected. They'd seen mighty things that God had done for them, and yet they still forget. Remembering, recounting, replaying, retelling the stories of God's acts of kindness and goodness and rescue always help us keep the big picture in mind. And what's the big picture? That God works on your behalf. Now, a lot of us have been going to church saying, I got to climb Jacob's ladder, right? We sang it. I got to work my way up. I got to be worthy. Validate myself by following the 10 Commandments, going to church. I even put money in the offering plate, whatever. But here's the deal. As much as you do and think you do for God, God has always done more for you and will do more for you. And it doesn't matter as much what you do for God, it's what God has done for you. That's what he doesn't want us to forget. Because he is committed, more committed to us than we're committed to him. Because he gave his very life, the person of Jesus Christ. So we look back for the sake of present confidence and future hope. It's what the psalmist said in Psalm 63, on my bed, I remember you, right? I think of you through the watches of the night because you are my help, and I sing in the shadow of your wings. Isaiah 46, remember the former things, those of long ago. I am God, and there is no other. I am God, and there's no one like me. So when you're thinking back and reminiscing, you have a fit of a little sentimentality, and you look back, God is saying, hey, when you're doing that, look back and think about me. When you can't sleep at night, you might be tossing and turning because you got an issue you got to work on. Matt's got a test tomorrow. He's going to be Carol's going to be tossing and turning. You know, he's got some drugs he's got to take tomorrow and doesn't know how he's going to feel. You have a test to take tomorrow. You're going to have that surprise quiz. Some of you are going to have that job review at the end of the month, and you're tossing and turning. Think about that, yes, but think about how God is committed to you and has been faithful to you and will see you through what you're tossing and turning about. That's the point. My dad was fond of saying this, past performance is the best predictor of future success. I mean, you know this to be true if you're interviewing candidates for a job. I mean, you want to know their track record of accomplishments and how they relate to people and how they handle problems. That they all assist us in helping make a hiring decision. So the question is, what's God's track record? Not that we're hiring him, but, you know, think back. What's his past performance? And so, my friends, we look back at the cross. We look back at the resurrection, and we can have confidence that Jesus will keep his word, that he will come again. And he will keep his word when he says, I will never leave you or forsake you, no matter how dark things seem, even though you may be walking through the valley of the shadow of death. I will fear no evil, for you are with me. So that's why we have these memorial stones, memories, monuments. We look at the things the milestones that God has done so we can have confidence for today and for tomorrow. But let's not leave our kids out because, right? Sometimes we say, well, this is good for me, kids, but it's not good for you, right? I mean, even one of the psalmists, Asaph, says, hey, I thought this was a good way to live until I had to teach this to my children. And then I couldn't because I didn't want them to grow up to be spoiled brats. So I checked myself, you know. It's a real check to say, ooh, if I have to live this way because I want to be a good example for my kids. So that's a helpful thing for these memorial stones. So when your children ask, what do these stones mean? You have a teachable moment. And you're able to say, here's what they mean. So for decades, our family, a friend of ours gave us this wreath. it wasn't a real one. It was, it was fake, but it was big. And they called it a memory wreath. And it was really cool. They were in our first Bible study when Tammy and I were married. They were older and had kids and were mentors to us. But they put a few things, like we had gone to a USC Notre Dame game together, football game. And so we had a ticket stub there. And we went on a camp out together, and she had made a little tent or something and put it up there. And so I had a few memories of what we had done together as couples as they were mentoring us. And they said, this is a memory wreath. Use it for your family. And so, man, every little fun thing that our family had done, we would try to take something or make something and put it on that wreath to have a memorial of it. And then our kids started breaking arms and legs. And so pieces of pink cast and blue cast would be on the memory wreath. And then we would go to a big ball game. We go to the national championship game in Arizona. So we put that thing. We go to the Pittsburgh won the Super Bowl with Tammy's brother. And so we've got, Super Bowl thing on there. And then there was that time when stitches were taken out, and my son wanted to put his stitches on the memory wreath. And then there was teeth that had fallen out, Instead of, and then they're like, no, I don't want $1 that you're going to give me, the tooth fairy, just put it on the memory wreath, because I told my son, because he had to get a couple of teeth pulled to get his braces in, I tell you what, if you let Dad pull them, I'll let you go anywhere you want for lunch. Because the dog dentist is going to cost me, he's going to charge me $100 a tooth. They're already wiggly and loose anyway. So, my son, thinking through that, goes, all right, how are we going to do this, Dad? I said, you're going to gargle with chloroseptic till you can't feel anything. That spray stuff when you're, oh man, so he gargled. He's like, oh, my mouth is numb now, Dad. I said, all right, plick, plick, came out like that. I said, where do you want to go eat? He's like, wait till the numbness wears off. I want to be able to taste it. So, so we went to pick some steakhouse, So he didn't want those teeth. He wanted those teeth on the memory wreath, because it was like, man, I let my dad pull my own teeth. We had crazy things. It was so much fun to go over those old memories. Our Christmas tree has turned into that now. Ornaments. Every time we go on vacation, Tammy and I, just when it's just she and I, no in-laws, no kids. We always pick out an ornament where we go somewhere to put on the wreath to remember this was a great vacation. This is one of the best dates we had in the 30 some odd years we've been married. And the kids, we actually, now that they're all on their own, it was kind of hard for Tammy because she's a sentimentalist, her. But we started giving the kids their ornaments that we had given them to mark certain things in their life. And now they're on their tree. Why? So that they can share with their kids. This was my ornament that my parents gave me when I played hockey. And we got like Santa playing hockey, some funky ornament. You see, these memories are important to pass down the stories of the past. The Feetner, that's my wife's maiden name, and the Feetner-Resch family reunions are monumental. I mean, we had 3 of them this year because we had three, my kids have 20 cousins, and they're all starting to get married, and they've all been friends together, and we've done family reunions every year together. And so we had 3 of them in one calendar year. And what's the best part of all of that? Sitting around late at night, we're playing Rummy Cube, we're playing Hearts, and we're telling stories of, remember that time when Allie got her head stuck between the bleachers and we had to call the ambulance because we couldn't get it out? You remember that one time when we were, and it always starts out, remember that one time? And we have a great time telling old stories. Now, those who will be wise when they're old must be inquisitive when they're young. And not just children, but us. My dear friend and counselor Ruth Ann Batstone used to tell me this: Steve, be more curious than sure. Well, then wouldn't you know it, Ted Lasso said it. Season 1, he said, be more curious than judgmental. All right? Remember when he's throwing the darts? All right? Great line. But my counselor Ruth Ann, she was way ahead of him. Be more curious than sure. In other words, ask more questions than making declarations. Be inquisitive rather than so sure, especially around seasoned citizens. So ask them questions. What was it like during the war? What was it like during the 70s? We don't live in unprecedented times, friends. Everything that we just went through in COVID happened in 68 through 72. Okay? I wrote a paper on it. You can ask me for it later. Including the Hong Kong flu, where 100,000 people in America died. 1 million worldwide. But maybe you could ask questions like, when did Jesus become real to you? How did that come about? It's fun, the Jesus Revolution, right? That's the name of the movie. You know, that's when I became a Christian in 71. I became a Jesus people. As my dad did too. I was 7 years old, Alexandria, Virginia. You know, how did God help you through that cancer scare? How did God help you when you were parenting teenagers? Another kind of scare. So God's mercies, my friends, are to our ancestors are mercies to us. All right, I need to move on. That's why I think that telling stories is really helpful, all right? Telling stories, especially of God's faithfulness, to help others put their faith and trust in Him. Because faith is not an absolute blind leap into the darkness. Faith always has to have an object. So the question is, what are you believing in? What am I having faith in? Whom am I having faith in? And if I'm going to put my faith in God, that's the object of my faith. I want to know His past track record, right? Because past performance is the best predictor of present and future success. So if I'm going to put my faith in Jesus, I got to know what He was like back then. I got to know who this God is if I'm going to start living my life in accordance to His will instead of mine. Because my past track record isn't that great. Look where it's gotten me. So go ahead and look back at God's track record and let your kids ask you that track record. And you kids ask that track record. And then let's move on. Testifying to the world of God's faithfulness. I like Joshua 4:24. He did this so that all the peoples of the earth might know that the hand of the Lord is powerful. I mean, my friends, the works of God's faithfulness have effects far beyond the immediate generation and far beyond the Israelite people of that day. He has His effects upon the entire world. And the wonderful works of God in the Bible are expected to affect those who hear about them as powerfully as those who saw them and lived them at that time. Right? John chapter 20. Jesus did many other miraculous signs in the presence of His disciples, which were not recorded in this book. But these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you might have life in His name. The account written of the Gospels, in a sense, is a memorial stone, a written account from eyewitness testimony, witnesses testifying to the fact of here's who the person of Jesus is, here's what He said, here's what He did, so that you can trust Him. You can have faith in Him. We're coming up to our 26th anniversary, Walnut Creek. I'm going to tell you a quick story. The second year of Walnut Creek, Tammy and I had rented a house before we bought ours, and we lived on the other side of town, and we lived next to Clay and Grace Tanner. He was Clay was a retired principal from a Columbus City high school, and they were our parents' age. They loved us. They said, we're not going to come to your church, but how can we financially support you? That's how much they believed in Walnut Creek, even in our inception. And we went to General Assembly in St. Louis at the time. This was back in the day before cell phones were really happening. There were still big bricks. I couldn't afford those. And I came back to our hotel room, and that's when the little light was blinking, which means you had a message. All right, somebody called the hotel and left me a message. So I picked up the phone, and it was Grace, our next door neighbor. And she said, Steve, I don't know where you are. I know you guys are gone and out of town for the next couple of weeks. But my Uncle Oliver wants to leave a sizable gift to a conservative Presbyterian cause. I said, oh, hello. The crazy thing is I had just had lunch at a Chinese buffet with Chris Yadrin, another church planter who was in the Chicago area. I know, I don't believe in divination. Don't tape this and tell the presbytery, but I had gotten my fortune. And guess what the fortune cookie little slip said? You will inherit a large piece of land or money soon. I was just being funny. I don't believe in divination. Don't start reading your horoscopes. There's a lot of horror in that, but excuse me. So I just was funny with Chris. I said, oh, Chris, God has a message for me in Walnut Creek. And I played it, put it in my pocket. I go to the hotel room. Here's a call. I call her uncle, who's 91 years old, living in a nursing home here in Columbus. I said, can I take you out to lunch, Uncle Oliver? I'd love to tell you about our conservative Presbyterian church plant. He says, no, Steve, just come on over. I'll treat you to lunch. He was fully aware, fully capable. I go to Uncle Oliver's place, 91, and walk out of there, and he wants to leave us money so we can get our building. Well, needless to say, I've got to cut this story a little bit shorter. We developed a relationship with him. He would come to church once in a while. He's like, man, I love what you're doing. Music's a little bit different for me, but, I was like, hey, it's still the old hymns, bro. We just don't use an organ. But he loved it, and then he met again. He would call me about every 3 or 4 years. I would go see him maybe twice a year, and then he would call, and every time he called, he said, I want to redo my will. I want to redo my will. Well, doggone it, the man was old, but he was making his money work. I mean, finally, the last time, it ends up being he left $400,000 to Covenant College, an endowment, a science student for Covenant College, $200,000 to Covenant Seminary, and then he said the remainder and residue will go to Walnut Creek Presbyterian Church. I said, well, would you like to see this land and church on this side of heaven? Because you could give it now. He's like, no, I'm making it work for you, Pastor. I was like, okay. I went to his 100th birthday party. And he died then he got cancer, and he called me and said, Pastor, I got cancer. I'm not going to do anything. I've lived a full life. I just want to go be with Jesus now. 2 weeks short of his 101st birthday, Uncle Oliver passed away. Well, it took about a year of probate, right, Matt? Or a year and a half. But you know what the remainder and residue ended up to be from his will? $500,000. $500,000. Gifted to us from a man who did not know us, only attended here a few times, who wanted to grace us with a gift so that we could build our first building. Well, you have $500,000, banks will talk to you. And we were able to build this. Quick, I don't know, I'm over time. Last one, you ready? Just in case any of you kids were wondering and want to ask your parent, where did that ugly stage come from, Walnut Creek? I'll tell you where this came from. I get a call when I'm in the office. We'd already moved in here. I'm in the office, get a call from Chris Tucker. He worked for Victoria's Secret. He said, Steve, man, we just finished Fashion Week in New York City. We've got this runway that the models just used. It's great wood. I think we could repurpose it for a stage. 2 days later, semi-truck comes in. They unload that, 3 plasma TVs and a bunch of other stuff. Yes, this was a Victoria's Secret runway at Fashion Week in New York City. Giselle Bundchen, yep, Tom Brady's wife walked right here. Crazy. God provided for us. The carpet came from another building that a church had gone through, had carpeted their church, and then sold it to us for $5,000. So we carpeted the entire building. We hired a guy for like $2,000, 2 guys. Less than $10,000, we were able to carpet this entire building. I mean, things like that God kept doing for us. So even the carpet squares, even the building, even the stage, please remember that God worked on our behalf and did something for us that was beyond what we could imagine or were even praying for. Two thoughts. It's not just the edifice of an arch or the memorial of a war. even a symbol of freedom like the Statue of Liberty. But you know what the scripture says? It says, each of you are a memorial stone. You are a living stone that fits together to form the family, the church of God. You are significant to this congregation. Listen to the scripture. As you come to him, the living stone, rejected by men, but chosen by God and precious to him, you also, like living stones, are being built into a spiritual house to be a holy priesthood, offering spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. You see, it's not just the stuff out there to remind us of what God has done. We are to be reminded of what God has done in and through you, my friend. And that he has called you to himself because he loved you so much. He gave his life for you. As we move into Holy Week, which is coming around the corner, this is the week to remember. That Holy Week is time to remember two important, greatest memorial stones of God's mighty redemptive works. The cross, right? God's great, important memorial that Christ's death means life to those who believe. Second, there's another stone involved in Holy Week, isn't there? The stone that was rolled away from Christ's tomb is an important memorial. That why? It commemorates, it proves, it demonstrates that Jesus conquered death and lives today to give us hope and healing as we go through life. So as we prepare for the Lord's Supper, let's call to mind, as we do this in remembrance of him. Let's pray. Lord, we remember you, not only how you have moved in our church and congregation, but how you've moved in each and every one of our lives. And we thank you. Amen.